You're a reporter. You find out that line didn't come from an angry citizen ranting on Twitter. It came from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, and it landed in the press briefing room like a punch thrown backward at the entire institution of journalism. No explanation, no evidence, no confirmation. Just a shoulder shrug with attitude. All in response to one simple question: did President Biden actually know that his signature was used to pardon a long list of individuals, or was it just a robotic hand doing the work for him? What sounded like a bland administrative inquiry carried the scent of scandal, like a burnt pie someone conveniently left in the oven. Because if the ultimate power of the presidency can be outsourced to an autopen, the American people are left to ask, who's really running the White House? That single question lit the fuse, because at the heart of this coming hearing is one simple fact. Donald Trump, the very man who ignited the controversy, also used an autopen during his presidency. And yet today, Caroline Leavitt, his fiercely loyal press secretary, tossed the burden of investigation onto the journalists. No one mentioned evidence. No one issued a confirmation. But the hearing is already on the calendar. The committee chair has it, and the seat for Caroline Leavitt, dusted off and waiting, has been assigned. This time, Caroline Leavitt doesn't get to point at a reporter and walk away. Today, before Congress, where no one chases down the truth on your behalf, she will have to sit down and answer for herself. The hearing room that morning was unusually cold, even though the air conditioner was clearly set to budget cautious. Maybe it wasn't the temperature. Maybe it was the presence of Caroline Leavitt, young, poised, photogenic, and habitually out of sync with the facts. The microphone in front of Caroline Leavitt seemed larger than usual. Or maybe it just sounded louder this time, because today there was no exit behind it. Across from her sat Representative Dan Goldman. He was known for dissecting political issues like he was defusing a bomb with tweezers. And this morning the bomb had a name, autopen. Ms. Leavitt, he began, I want to be very clear. Why did President Trump claim that President Biden's pardons were invalid simply because he used an autopen to sign them? And more importantly, are you aware that President Trump also used an autopen during his time in office? A quiet inhale could be heard from the back row. A Democratic congresswoman leaned over and whispered something to her colleague. Caroline tilted her head slightly, her eyes cool, as if what had just been asked was nothing more than a typo. I think that's a question everyone in this room should be asking. The use of a signing device in place of the president, if done without clear consent, could raise serious legal concerns. Goldman raised an eyebrow. Investigate who exactly? President Biden or President Trump? Because when Biden uses it, it's a constitutional crisis. But when Trump used it, it was a symbol of efficiency, right? The air in the room tightened like a piano wire wound a step too sharp. Caroline replied in a steely voice, I'm not saying anyone broke the law. I'm saying if something like that happened, signing without proper authorization, then yes, it would be serious. And that's why I believe the reporters should look into it. A journalist from NBC gave a faint snort and muttered under his breath, Good thing we're not getting paid to do her job for her. Goldman didn't respond. He simply turned a page in the folder before him, as if quietly acknowledging something disappointing. That perhaps she had come to this hearing armed with exactly one argument, and a well-practiced mask of calm. The hearing had barely begun, but it already felt like Caroline Leavitt had brought her own ending and laid it on the table from the start. If her opening was a clean sidestep, technically executed, then what followed was the moment she lost control of the wheel and began skidding straight into the wall. Dan Goldman gently slid a printed pardon order across the table, not to read it, but to display it, like a modern-day judge laying out evidence. His voice was even, surgical, as if slicing a sliver of truth from a political iceberg. So let me ask you once again, was the president informed that his signature, his name, the very embodiment of executive authority, was affixed to dozens of pardons? Leavitt, never one to waste an opening to spin doubt into philosophy, leaned into her talking point. If the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents, then I think it's a question that everybody in this room should be looking into. A few members of Congress exchanged glances, as if they'd just heard the answer to a Miss America pageant question, not a response from the nation's press secretary. She continued, "Certainly, that would propose, perhaps criminal or illegal behavior. If staff members were signing the President of the United States autograph without his consent." A Republican congressman flipped noisily through his folder, the way someone might in silent prayer. "Please don't let her repeat the exact same line from last week's press briefing." Goldman tilted his head slightly. "So, no evidence, and a philosophical exercise for the committee to consider." Leavitt said nothing at first, then, true to form, steered the conversation the only way she knew. "That's a question you should ask Biden. Is there any evidence on that he wasn't aware of it?" This time a few people actually laughed. The kind of laugh that says, only Caroline Leavitt would stand in the middle of a congressional hearing and throw the responsibility back at the audience. A reporter whispered like a sports commentator calling a play, "Classic deflection, the queen of responsibility dodging. Great, now we're doing the White House press secretary's job for her." Goldman leaned back in his chair, massaging his temples. Then he spoke quietly, almost too calm to be anything but sharp. "Let the record show Ms. Leavitt has not provided a single answer except to assign someone else to do her job." A rude clack sounded from his pen hitting the table, like a metronome signaling her dissent had officially begun. But the hearing was far from over. Goldman offered a crooked smile. The kind of smile you give when someone says something so irresponsible, you make a mental note to quote it later. To your lawyer. "Ms. Leavitt, I'll ask this one last time. Do you have any evidence, any at all, for the claims you've made?" The room fell silent for 3 seconds. No rustle of paper, no coughing, just anticipation laced with disbelief. "Ma'am, you are the White House press secretary, not a political reaction YouTuber. Your job is to provide the truth, not to dare others to go hunting for it." Leavitt, now fully leaning into deflection, tossed the word reporter at Goldman like an insult, as if turning a congressional question into some tabloid trivia hunt would make it go away. "Maybe what I said is true. Maybe it isn't. You're a reporter, aren't you? You find out." A young congresswoman, arms crossed, leaned toward her colleague and muttered, "Dear God, are we seriously playing truth roulette with the White House press secretary now?" Goldman leaned forward, tapping the folder in front of him. "Let me quote you directly, Miss Leavitt. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. Do you understand what that means?" His voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. "That's not just ambiguity. That is a confession spoken into a microphone that says, I am the spokesperson for the President of the United States, and I have no intention of verifying what's true. And frankly, I don't really care." He didn't wait for her to blink before delivering the next blow. "You haven't just diminished the role of press secretary, you've insulted the very framework of transparency that sustains a democracy." Leavitt pressed her lips together, but Goldman wasn't finished. "What chills me isn't just what you said. It's how effortlessly, how casually, you said it as if accountability belongs to someone else, and the megaphone of power is yours alone." He straightened his notes, then hit the final note with quiet precision. "What's worse is that you found it perfectly acceptable to say that here in Congress, in the one chamber built to protect truth, not to legitimize suspicion. Your arrogance doesn't just damage the credibility of your title. It chips away at the very public trust that underpins the democracy you claim to represent." In that room, time didn't stand still. It simply stumbled. Caroline Leavitt kept her posture, but her confidence now felt like the last layer of stage makeup under bright committee lights starting to melt. Dan Goldman picked up the remote, though everyone knew the real spotlight wasn't on the screen. It was on the woman sitting directly across from him. "With permission, I'd like to play a clip from a recent press briefing by Ms. Leavitt, and I ask that this time, everyone listen carefully, word for word." The screen lit up. Leavitt's voice came through, cold, clear, untouched. "We want to restore the Department of Justice to an institution that focuses on fighting law and order." There was a beat of silence. Then wait. "What?" Someone blurted it out from the press seat. Laughter erupted from the Democratic side, not the gleeful kind, but the specific kind reserved for watching someone accidentally shoot themselves in the foot with their own party's talking points. Goldman didn't laugh. He simply stood, calm, and continued. Your own words, Miss Levitt. You said, fighting law and order? Not fighting crime, not fighting for law and order, but fighting law and order itself. He paused just long enough for the implication to land. And if you think that's just a minor slip, then maybe you shouldn't be speaking on behalf of a president. Levitt sat still, not in a composed way, but like someone whose brain just hit the SOS button and got no signal. A Democratic congresswoman leaned over and quipped, well, now I get why they want to pull DOJ out of Ukraine. They're busy fighting law and order at home. Goldman turned back, sharp as ever. Ms. Levitt, just to confirm, you said this administration wants the Department of Justice to fight law and order. Is that correct? I mean, I meant fight crime, not... Levitt scrambled, like someone trying to sweep up shattered glass with their bare hands. Goldman didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He just delivered the line with the weight of quiet judgment. That's all right, Ms. Levitt. In D.C., people misspeaks all the time. The difference is not everyone misspeaks in a way that accidentally confesses the very thing we've suspected all along. Sometimes the truth slips out of people's mouths, more easily than it slips into official policy. The room dimmed not literally, but emotionally. Half light for the laughter, half shadow for what everyone now understood. Because here in this chamber, everyone knew. A press secretary can flub a word, but an administration never accidentally exposes its worldview. The air hadn't quite settled after the slip when Goldman went on, with the same unsettling calm. Well, they've achieved that. If the goal was to turn the Department of Justice into an institution that, as you put it, fights law and order, then congratulations. The Trump administration succeeded. They did it by weaponizing the DOJ in precisely the way they accused Joe Biden of doing. No need for hypotheticals. Just ask Michael Flynn. Ask Roger Stone. Ask Jeffrey Clark. Ask anyone who once believed that the law should be above politics until they realized politics could command the prosecutor. Levitt subtly rotated her wrist, readying a response. But Goldman struck again, this time with the final blow. You said, fighting law and order. And yes, maybe it sounded like a slip of the tongue, but when I look at how your administration has managed the Department of Justice, I don't hear a mistake. I hear a leaked page from the internal playbook. Levitt opened her mouth to counter, but the words came out faint, like they didn't quite believe in themselves. I think you're misinterpreting what I meant. Goldman placed his folder flat on the table. He wasn't flipping pages anymore. He was flipping the mask. Let me be very clear, Ms. Levitt, so there's no room for misinterpretation. Is it true that the Trump administration is considering withdrawing from the International Center for the Prosecution of the Crime of Aggression in Ukraine, the very body coordinating efforts to investigate war crimes committed by Russian President Vladimir Putin? The word Russia always carried its own gravity, especially when spoken by someone who once served on an impeachment inquiry team. Levitt answered, with a tone bordering on neutral, I'm not able to confirm it because I have not heard that. A Democratic congressman gently laid his pen across his notebook, arms folded, the posture of someone who's heard this dance before. Feeling the walls closing in, Levitt did what she always did, change the subject, redirect, cast doubt, a reflex now built into her rhythm. I will caution, I know there have been many inaccurate and misleading reports from Reuters lately, so I would caution anybody taking that seriously. Look, we've seen time and again that some of these so-called trusted outlets are more focused on pushing a narrative than presenting facts. It is not the job of the press to create panic over unverified claims, especially when national security and global diplomacy are involved. So until we have full confirmation from within our administration, I would strongly advise caution when treating anonymous sources as gospel truth. Goldman shook his head slowly. Let me make this very clear. For everyone watching this hearing, and especially for those still under the impression that this is merely a policy debate, you just refused to confirm a piece of information that could directly affect the United States' position within the international community, namely, whether or not we are continuing to support the prosecution of war crimes in Ukraine. And instead of simply saying, "I don't have that information," you took a much more familiar route. You attacked the messenger. He raised his voice ever so slightly, not in anger, but in volume, so it would echo beyond the chamber. "You have no evidence, no memo from the State Department, no communication from the National Security Advisor, no official statement whatsoever. But what you do have on cue is an accusation that Reuters, one of the oldest news agencies in the world, present in over 90 countries, is misleading the public. And Ms. Levitt, if your approach to handling information is considered a standard operating procedure for this administration, then we're not just witnessing a collapse of trust. We're watching in real time the normalization of a post-truth government, wrapped in a confident smile and a casual shrug." Levitt offered one of those shrugs. "But I can check in and get back to you on that. I'm not in a position to confirm it right now." Goldman cut in. No more courtesy pauses. No more waiting for the pivot. "No, Ms. Levitt, this is not about whether you've had time to confirm something. This is about the fact that whenever you're asked about anything inconvenient, you default to undermining the very process of journalism itself. Last time it was CNN. Today it's REUTERS. Who's next, AP, BBC, or will it be every single outlet that doesn't get their copy pre-approved by you?" Goldman pressed on. "This is no longer just a hearing about words. This is a living, breathing example of how power, when stripped of accountability, begins to attack reality itself. When people can't control the truth, they start calling the truth fake news. And when that happens often enough, the public stops knowing what's real and what's just a game." He turned to face Levitt again. "Ma'am, when a government fails to control information, it begins attacking the people who report it. And when that behavior becomes habitual, journalism stops being a watchdog and starts being painted as a threat by those in power. If you've never heard that said inside the White House, then I'm sorry you may have shown up at the right place, but you clearly sat in on the wrong lesson." Goldman wasn't smiling anymore. His voice had lost its sharpness. Now it was slow and precise, like a final echo against the collapsing walls of public trust in the hearing room. "Ms. Levitt, I'm not going to ask you for more information, because at this point, I understand. When you don't have an answer, you don't stay silent. You don't admit you're unsure or waiting for clarification. You pivot quickly, smoothly, and always with the same pattern. You attack the person asking the question, and at that moment, you're no longer a spokesperson for the president. You've become the mouthpiece for a strategy that says, let's make the public so doubtful they don't know who to trust anymore. And once every source of information is branded suspicious, there's only one voice left that people are allowed to believe, the voice of power. That's not politics anymore. That's the foundation of authoritarianism." There was a pause. Goldman glanced toward the press bench, then turned back. "This is no longer just a media strategy. This is chapter 1 of the authoritarian playbook. Make people doubt everything except power. Don't trust you. Don't trust Reuters. Don't trust the Associated Press. So tell me, Ms. Levitt, who should the American people trust? The reports reviewed by 3 levels of editors? Or the forwarded messages from a MAGA Telegram group? Should they trust agencies on the ground in Ukraine? Or anonymous posts from a handle named Patriot 1776? If this is the information ecosystem the White House is promoting, then we're no longer debating policy. We're holding a hearing inside the post-truth era where every question is a conspiracy, every fact is a theory, and every voice that doesn't echo the administration is treated as the enemy." Levitt picked up her pen, then put it down without writing. She nodded, slowly, not in agreement, but like someone acknowledging that they had nothing left to push back with. Goldman didn't wait for a rebuttal. He didn't need one. A press secretary who cannot confirm anything beyond a handful of talking points, who responds to scrutiny not with answers, but with reflexive attacks on the reporter or the report. That is not press work. That is the formula for a post-truth system where every question is a plot, and every piece of journalism can be dismissed with nothing more than a strategic furrowed brow. Behind him, a congressman quietly flipped through a folder, its pages marked with red ink. A reporter stopped taking notes and simply stared at Levitt, as if waiting for any shred of resistance that hadn't yet evaporated. But Levitt said nothing, because at this point there was nothing left to question except the very things she couldn't answer. No one in the room was wondering what she was hiding anymore. They were simply wondering if there was anything there at all beneath the rehearsed lines and the weaponized expressions of doubt. Dan Goldman leaned slightly into the mic. "You know, Ms. Levitt, Kayleigh McEnany lied. A lot. Not in slips or stumbles, but in fully constructed systems of distortion. Layered messaging, repeated with precision, as if she were reciting public policy rather than propaganda. And I won't deny it, she was highly effective at it. We used to joke that every time Kayleigh stepped up to the podium, she dragged half the Library of Congress with her binders as thick as audit reports, tabbed by scandal category and statistics down to the decimal point. Even if they were wielded to warp reality, she didn't just lie. She navigated deception like a media vessel in a storm of scrutiny, never drifting an inch off message. And do you know what's strange, Ms. Levitt? Even when we knew she wasn't telling the truth, at least we never doubted that she knew exactly what she was doing." Levitt didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She didn't bristle. Because this time Goldman wasn't accusing her. He was describing her absence of preparation, of substance, of strategy. He turned toward her again, voice calm but laced with unmistakable disappointment. "But you, Caroline, you came here empty-handed. No binder, no data, no plan. And yet you brought one thing in spades: the readiness to attack anyone who dared question you even when you had no answers of your own. That persistent confidence, that volume equals validity. That casting doubt makes you the one in control. You didn't answer. You counterpunched. You didn't inform. You deflected. And when the words ran out, you didn't pause to reflect. You cast suspicion on the reporting process itself, on the very idea of a valid question. And the saddest part isn't that you were unprepared. It's that you walked in here believing, truly believing, that you didn't have to be. And if that's the case, then maybe this isn't just a hearing to question a press secretary. Maybe this is an inquiry into the consequences of choosing the wrong voice to speak for a republic." A soft draft passed through the chamber, or maybe it was just the aftershock of a collective realization. That hollow silence you feel when witnessing a freefall, that didn't need a push. All it took was enough light and the truth revealed itself. And sometimes it's not that someone has fallen, it's that the entire room realizes they were never standing on solid ground to begin with. Dan Goldman lowered his eyes to the thick stack of red-marked notes in front of him, as if silently confirming what everyone already knew. This part of the hearing was over. Even if the other side never admitted defeat, he looked up not at Caroline Levitt this time, but at the press bench, at Congress, at the people watching across the country. Truthfully, it would be easy to end this hearing with a dramatic line like, "Get her out of there." But this was never about one person, and it certainly isn't just about Caroline Levitt. This is a system, a model, a strategy repeated over and over again, where spokespeople are not trained to answer, but to evade, where silence is not an oversight, but a tool. This is what the press faces every day, an administration that doesn't lie the old-fashioned way, but denies the very concept of verifiable truth. A machine with a spokesperson who doesn't verify, doesn't engage, doesn't take responsibility, just counters, just casts doubt, and just rejects anything that doesn't serve power. Goldman looked at Levitt not with anger, but with something far emptier. "You're not a spokesperson, Ms. Levitt. You're the wall between the public and the truth. But there's something you should remember. When the truth is blocked for too long, it doesn't go silent. It finds another way. And when the truth reaches the people not through you, not through the White House, then the thing that gets exposed isn't just the information, it's the entire purpose of the silence." He turned to the press bench. "From this point forward, the media will have to navigate in the dark, not because they lack sources, but because the center of the White House has become a vault of doubt and shadows. And you, Ms. Levitt, you're just the keeper of the keys. No applause, no cheers, not a single pen tap, no flash from the cameras. Only one thing moved, Caroline Levitt slowly lowering her head, gathering her papers as if even she wasn't sure what exactly she was packing up. And everyone understood. That gesture wasn't for the end of a hearing. It was for the end of credibility. She left the witness table without another word. The only thing left behind at her seat was the cold, hollow outline of a position once known as the voice of the President of the United States. But in that exact moment of silence, Washington began to shake. By the next morning, the headlines exploded like political fireworks over America. Leavitt bows, MAGA goes mute. The spokesperson who lost her voice, White House in crisis of credibility. I don't know is no longer an answer. It's an admission. On Twitter, the clip of Dan Goldman saying, "You're not a spokesperson. You're the wall blocking the truth. And when the truth is blocked for too long, it doesn't stay silent, it finds another way." Crossed 12 million views in under an afternoon. On Capitol Hill, Republican lawmakers were strangely silent. No one came to her defense like they usually did with MAGA foot soldiers. Some closed their notebooks faster than usual. Some refused interviews. Some simply stopped mentioning her name altogether. Internal GOP meetings grew tense. One leaked memo read, "Control the messaging. Do not let this hearing become a blueprint." No one explained what it meant, but everyone understood. Outside, the media came to a collective, unspoken consensus. They would no longer go to Caroline Leavitt for answers. They would go around her. They'd trace emails, leak documents, whistleblowers from within the West Wing. They would map the power structure without guidance from the press podium. Because the one truth made clear by this hearing was that the person assigned to speak the truth had become an expert at bearing it. And Caroline? She returned to her office in silence. No press conferences, no rebuttal statement, not even a "thank you for tuning in" post. Because she knew, or at the very least, could feel that silence was no longer a tactic. It was the consequence. And in Washington, when silence becomes the identity of a press secretary, it's no longer a failed performance. It's an unspoken resignation.